The Elder Scrolls Online, an incredible MMO with dynamic combat mechanics, fantastic advanced game systems, years worth of content, and a huge established community. Arguably one of the best and most successful MMOs available right now, and my favorite game of many years. New World, a new title from Amazon Games which early in development changed its direction from a sandbox PvP game to a more theme park PvX game, yet has an ever-growing community that made hundreds to thousands of guilds and companies before the game even launched, and made it one of the most viewed categories on Twitch on the first day of its beta. Two grand MMOs soon to be competing with each other over PvP, PvE, housing, and role-playing communities from all over the genre. So, which one is better, which one should you play, and why? To answer these questions, I am going to compare the two games side by side in 7 different aspects that define games of the MMORPG genre. Story and lore, combat system, crafting, PvE content, PvP content, player housing, and game systems. For the sake of the comparison, I've decided to give each MMO a score between 1 to 10 for each gameplay aspect, to make it easier for you to judge which game I found more successful in each. Before we get started, I'd like to give a big shout out to my patrons on Patreon. Thank you guys so much for supporting me and allowing me to keep making videos and streams even while I'm no longer able to do it full time. For more information about how to support me, please check out the description below. And now, let's get started. 1. Story and lore. Starting with the good old ESO, this game's lore goes far beyond the specific title and throughout the whole series of the Elder Scrolls games that's been a crowd favorite and a personal favorite of mine for years. The lore of the Elder Scrolls games is considered one of the best out of any gaming franchise, the world building of these games is phenomenal, and the characters are very well written whether they are good or bad. Except Nazim, Nazim. ESO is no different from the rest of the franchise here. In terms of gameplay, it has many differences to the other games, but in terms of lore, I must say the Elder Scrolls history and storylines are perfectly preserved, enhanced, and even built upon in ESO, except the Dragon Break, Re. The main story, the DLCs, the chapters, and the world itself are perfectly built, and whether we explore them ourselves, learn of them through NPCs, or discover the world through quests, ESO simply does a perfect job at showcasing the wonderful Elder Scrolls lore on which it is built, and tell us an incredible amount of stories in the best ways an MMO can. In story and lore, ESO gets 10 out of 10 from me. But what about New World, a brand new MMO taking place in a brand new land, nothing to base itself off, all made from scratch? Well, I have to say, New World handles this wonderfully. New World's world building and story building acknowledges how new the game is and utilizes that. Instead of trying to hook us up on a beautiful, fantastic world we've never heard of, New World takes advantage of our lack of knowledge and builds its story on top of the feeling of mystery and cluelessness. New players in the game spawn in one of several different areas on the island of Eternum, where New World takes place, and slowly learn through either questing or venturing into the wilds about how dark and grim the island truly is, despite how fantastic and full of life it seems to be on the surface. From pirate ships to ancient ruins, from untamed jungles to frozen wastes, New World's sense of environment design is brilliant. The only lack in this aspect I've found with New World is the main story itself. While the world it's taking place at is incredible, the main story feels a bit lacking, and I never really got attached to any of the characters I had to work with while playing through it, nor was I incredibly invested in their cause. Considering how new the game is, I think this is acceptable and could hopefully be improved in the future. In story and lore, New World gets 7 out of 10 from me. 2. Combat system. ESO's combat system, in my opinion, is one of the biggest strengths of the game. A surprisingly dynamic system that rewards players who learn its ins and outs and take advantage of its mechanics, that doesn't limit players using cooldowns and animation locks, encourages movement of your character even while fighting, and lets you do your own thing, choose your own style, and find your way of making it viable and effective. ESO's combat system allows you to play the game your own way. You can set your character to have high resource regeneration to allow you to button mash. You can set it to have higher damage output using precise and well-timed combos. You can play it casually and enjoy the freedom it provides, or learn how to take it to its limits using animation cancelling and basic light and heavy attacks weaving in between skills to increase your damage output. ESO's combat system feels limitless and free. It doesn't hold players back using means like cooldowns, harsh resource management, or animation locks, and has a very high skill ceiling. In combat system, ESO gets a 9 out of 10 from me, with 10 being ESO of 2015, when animation cancelling was more effective and rewarding, and your skills affected your gameplay more than your item sets. New World's combat system is so different from ESO's, yet so similar at the same time. It's centered around cooldowns, with only 6 skills split in between 2 weapons being available to the player at any given moment, meaning oftentimes players could find themselves with no skills available to cast out of cooldowns for several seconds at a time if they don't play carefully. Yet light and heavy attacks also exist in the game and have more of an effect and value than in most MMOs. New World does support animation cancelling and attack weaving on some skills like self-buffs, yet on damaging and healing skills, there often are uncancelable animations which the enemy can take advantage of to retaliate and stun the player or cancel out their skills. While New World's combat system seems limited by the small number of skills each player can use, it doesn't really feel that way once you get used to the combat. The small amount of skills allows each one of them to be very powerful in its own way and have a drastic effect, which forces each player to pay a lot of attention to what the enemy players and mobs are doing throughout a fight, rather than only pay attention to your own actions, and rewards careful and patient playstyles. The combat system New World has to offer is certainly super skill based, perhaps even more than ESO's, which definitely means something in the MMO's genre. And yet, the slow and patient playstyle isn't everyone's cup of tea, and I feel like for some players or playstyles, the slow pacing of combat and the lower APM or actions per minute that can be used in the game, alongside its limited mobility and hard locked animations, could be looked at as a downside. In my book, New World gets an 8 out of 10 for its combat system scoring, yet it's showing a massive potential for future improvements. Next, let's talk about crafting. Crafting in ESO is the perfect example of a well-designed and implemented system. It requires a lot of time and dedication to master crafting in the game, but you can benefit off of the types of crafting you've been advancing at even while still in the middle of the process. The payoffs for putting time and effort into the system definitely exist, with some of the best and most effective items in the game only being available through crafting, from effective potions to powerful gear sets and even unique furniture for player housing. The system feels complete, it rewards the effort players put into it, yet isn't mandatory for every player to sink their time into. It feels good, it's clear to understand as a new player, and is relevant even in the endgame. New World's crafting system, however, showcases how a system can be way beyond just well designed, and how by taking a certain game mechanic to the edge, you can create a wonderful experience for players that are just getting into it. Unlike ESO's crafting system, New World's one has got so many layers to it that I probably can't get into all of them in this video. Crafting is as important for your advancement in the game as it is in ESO, perhaps even more, yet requires far more than just learning a specific type of craft to a certain level to benefit fully off of. The crafting system in New World starts from the gathering part, where you have to spot the materials you're looking for, harvest and gather them, refine them, and craft with them to increase the effectiveness of your whole process. By gathering materials of a certain type often, you increase your own gathering speed, unlock new materials you can gather, and even get better at tracking resources eventually, having them displayed on your compass once you've become experienced with them. Unlike in ESO's system, in New World, to find a specific material, you don't depend purely on RNG and luck to find it, and not all resource nodes match themselves to your level of gathering. You must discover the mining area for each metal you want to harvest, figure out where different monsters and animals roam to get their hides, and figure out effective gathering paths and different routes to make the best out of your time and gather the most resources. Similarly to gathering, refining and crafting in New World also increase their respective skill lines and unlock newer crafting recipes as you improve at them. In addition, you must unlock better, higher level crafting stations for the sake of crafting more effective items, a system which deeply connects to the conquering and PvP systems of the game, which we'll get to a bit later on. At the end of this comparison in crafting, I give ESO an 8 and New World a perfect 10 out of 10. 4. PvE Content and Mechanics. When looking into PvE content, ESO stands out not just in this specific comparison, but generally in the MMO genre. ESO has years of PvE content under its belt, dozens of DLCs and expansions, and many free base game zones as well. The game has always put very high priority into making quality PvE content, from questing to achievement hunting to overland bosses and delves and to group dungeons. ESO's quests are very high quality, its dungeons have many clear and indicative yet not always simple mechanics to figure out, tons of things to do and adventures to complete, and it is the perfect game for any PvE focused player or guild to take a deep dive into. In terms of quality, ESO's PvE environment is fantastic. In terms of quantity, there's more than enough content for a new player to sink months and years into completing. In terms of difficulty, however, there's much to discuss. ESO's PvE difficulty has slowly been degrading over the years, between intentional nerfs to difficult mechanics and introductions of more powerful sets and skills over time. Completing overland content has become nothing short of a joke in terms of challenge. For some players, this could be a great thing. Not everyone is looking for a difficult challenge behind every bend, and for the casual player, ESO's PvE content is heaven. For more hardcore players, however, being able to strip your character of any items and weapons and still being able to beat a boss intended for a group to fight might be a little bit discouraging. There is, however, a solution even for more hardcore PvE players in ESO. DLC veteran dungeons and trials, which often have a trifecta achievement, which requires players to complete a series of tasks with very difficult limitations, could fill the lack of a challenging PvE task. Those, however, tend to come very few times a year, and so for existing endgame PvE players who already completed most content in the game, there isn't too much to do until the first month of a new chapter. Considering all I've said so far, I give ESO an 8 out of 10 for PvE content. The PvE is great for the majority of players, and for any new player of any type, there's a maddening amount of new content to complete, all of which is very high quality. Now let's talk about PvE New World. It's great. The overland content is very fun, parts of which are challenging and parts of which are more relaxed. The fact enemies don't scale down to your level in New World gives it a great sense of challenge and progression. If you're looking for a challenge, you can go into a higher level zone and fight more difficult mobs, and if you're looking for a more relaxed PvE experience, you can stay in lower level zones for as long as you want and take your time progressing. This is something I personally really enjoyed, especially when me and a friend traveled to one of the most difficult zones in the game at a low level, and kept getting 1 or 2 shot by mobs in a frozen wasteland filled with undead. Whereas in ESO, a level 15 character can jump into the realm of a Daedric prince and pretty much destroy its entire armies and legions without struggling too much. In terms of dungeons and group content, New World seems lackluster compared to ESO. Being a brand new game with no expansions at this stage, and only so much time put into the development of PvE attractions, New World doesn't have too much content for your group to do. While the quests, overland areas and bosses, and group dungeons all feel very high quality and very much enjoyable in New World, the low quantity of those is definitely a drawback for a player who's aiming to only focus on PvE content in their gameplay. Overall, I think the only thing limiting New World's PvE aspect is time. If the game sees massive success and gets new DLCs and expansions, I can envision the island of Eternum growing and advancing, with new zones and dungeons being added and tons of new content being introduced. Until that time, however, New World gets a 6 out of 10 in the PvE department. Next, PvP content and mechanics. PvP is my personal favorite gameplay aspect and the thing I've spent the most time doing in my time playing in both ESO and New World, so let's get right to it. PvP in ESO is incredible. The wonderful combat system lets you do so much in PvP scenarios, whether it's fighting solo versus a group of enemies or running an organized crew of players to destroy an enemy army. The possibilities are absolutely endless, there are many different playstyles and a ton of fun to be had. In terms of game modes, you have open world PvP in Cyrodiil and Imperial City zones, battleground matches of up to 4v4v4, and a dueling system as well. However, PvP in ESO has not really changed in many years. For years, players of the PvP community have been asking for a ranking system, a competitive scene, new game modes and maps to play on, and a system to allow group versus group fights. Yet none of these things have happened so far or seem to be coming in the foreseeable future. If we're being completely honest though, even if such things got introduced into the PvP scene in ESO, they would likely not get much attention due to the ever-shrinking size of the ESO PvP community. Once a huge and impressive community with endless supply of players for all game types and playstyles all throughout the day, now is only a fraction of its former self, to the point of players being pulled into incorrect MMR ranking in Battlegrounds due to the lack of a player base per MMR category. The main reason the ESO PvP community has been shrinking is not the lack of content or any issues with the combat system itself, but rather mainly balance issues lasting for months and years sometimes, and more than anything, the unmanageable amount of bugs and lag in the game. The game's performance in any PvP environment, and especially in open world fights, has been going downhill for years at this point, despite the overall amount of players playing in PvP shrinking. And while the devs have put quite a bit of effort into fighting the source of the performance issues and trying to fix them, no significant improvements have been done in many years, driving many players and guilds away from the game and keeping many of them looking for a new PvP-based MMO to play, which is exactly where New World comes in. For PvP, I give ESO a 5 out of 10. I think back in the day, around 2014 or 2016, I would have given ESO's PvP system a 9 or a 10, but sadly today's PvP environment is not even comparable to that of back then. Now on to New World. PvP in New World has been a refreshing and very needed change of pace. The combat system is very different to that of most MMOs, very skill-based and very punishing, yet immensely enjoyable for hardcore and casual players alike, resulting in many incredible PvP scenarios, whether in small group fights, duels, or large armies clashing. In terms of PvP game modes, New World has all of them. Seriously, all of them. You can opt into PvP over land in every corner of the world other than inside main cities and find great fights. There are forts scattered across the land which you and friends can claim, then fight other factions to defend. You can fight other people in quest zones, outside city walls, or randomly when running into them in the middle of the road or at a random landmark. While the PvP in New World is opt-in, there are many incentives for players to flag themselves to PvP, whether that is their main focus in the game or not. Players get more experience while flagged for PvP, they can get additional faction quests, earn additional types of currency, and find more items when they kill enemy players. While some players may choose to flag themselves to PvE at times, many do opt into PvP, and even while roaming the world randomly or trying to quest, you are bound to run into solo adventurers or organized groups of players which you can choose to fight if you flagged yourself to PvP. In addition to the opt-in open world PvP, New World has many additional game modes: duels, group versus group, faction wars for control over forts and cities, and Outpost Rush, which is an instant PvP game mode for endgame players. The only thing holding New World's PvP system back, in my opinion, is the lack of balance between weapon types, which is bound to be sorted out over time, and the tendencies of fights to end in the losing side running away for a long amount of minutes before the other can catch up to them and finish the fight completely. With all that said, I've decided to give New World's PvP system a solid 9 out of 10. With great performance comes great ranking, and if they manage to solve some very specific problems, the PvP system might be the best one we've encountered to date. 6. Player housing. Let's start again with ESO. The housing system in the game is wonderful, yet very limited. There are many different items and collectibles you can place in your instanced houses, and many different locations for these houses to exist in. Yet there is a very harsh limit to the amount of items you can place in a house, which can only be increased by paying the game an additional monthly subscription, which still doesn't make the items limit quite sufficient if you'd like to pay attention to details in multiple areas of your house. Despite this unfortunate limitation, there are so many different possibilities in ESO's housing. You can create rooms, mazes, forests, castles, parkour puzzles, hidden secrets, and piles of sweet rolls. Outside of Rift Online's dimension system, which had far less limitations and far more ways to customize items in your houses, which allowed you to create entire cities and dungeons in your own instance, ESO has to be the second best where it comes to player housing, at least in my mind. In players housing, ESO gets a 7 out of 10. In New World, the housing system seems to be far less complex. There don't seem to be quite as many items to unlock, far less customization when designing your house, and a lot less interactable objects. And yet, it has one thing that it does far better than ESO, and in my opinion is a game changer. While all housing is instanced, just like in ESO, by meeting some requirements, specific houses could be featured in cities for all players to see even from outside the specific instance, and in the main one the city is located at. Players inside said houses can look outside and see the people walking in the streets, and it works the other way around as well. While not every instance of the same house can be featured for obvious reasons, the opportunity and potential of having your personally designed home be seen as a part of the settlement or a town you live in is a wonderful concept, and I very much adore it. In player housing, New World gets a 5 out of 10 and can hopefully increase in scoring over time once the game has more content added, and through that more items and customization options. Last but not least, game systems. I think many of the previous subjects touched this one at least partially, yet I'd like to go over it once more and explain my thoughts on the systems in each game fully. ESO has many uniquely synergizing systems. As an example, the Gathering system grants the players materials which they can either sell or use in the Crafting system to make weapons and armor, which can be used to defeat enemies in PvE and PvP, to gain rewards which can consist of additional gear, but also recipes for additional items, unlocked through systems such as scrying and excavating, to gain additional loot, for example, furnitures to be placed in your instanced home. This is but one example out of many, as the many game systems ESO has to offer do connect and synergize quite well together, but only in very specific ways. It feels like most of the systems of the game only synergize and improve on one another when it comes to the items you can get or materials you can use. New World, however, takes this a step further. All of its different systems enrich one another in many different ways. The opt-in PvP allows players to receive more PvE quests, which by completing can increase their faction reputation in the zone. When a certain faction received enough reputation in a zone, it can declare war against the current owner of the zone, resulting in a large instanced war, which once won, grants players better harvesting speed, access to higher level crafting stations, and allows some of their houses to be featured in the city. Again, this is but one example out of many different ways, but it showcases how, in a brilliant move, New World ties all different aspects of the game into one another, encouraging players who focus on any type of content normally to work alongside for the mutual benefit of all. This sort of effective synergy is a wonderful way to create communities in MMOs and to encourage players, without forcing them, to dabble in different gameplay aspects they normally wouldn't attempt to. With all that said, in game systems, I give ESO an 8 and New World a 10. Summing up all of these points, assuming I'm not even worse at math than I think I am, you can see both games scored a 55 out of 70. While both games have room for improvements, both are brilliant and super enjoyable games that can provide hours of fun and a ton of different types of content. Now, before I get any, "But Nern, you didn't tell us which game is better" in the comment section, let me just say this. I did not originally mean to give the two games the exact same scoring. It just randomly happened when I summed up all the scoring I gave each game per aspect. But I do think this result indicates perfectly well what I'd love for you to take from this video. Both games are great. Both games are worthy of your time if you choose to play them. They simply have different things in which they excel. If you're a casual PvE player looking to get into a game with endless amount of content for you, you should try out ESO. If you're a hardcore PvP player looking for a good performance and a fun PvP environment, I'd recommend trying out New World. If you want to design the best complex houses, ESO might be the place for you. If you're looking for a super in-depth harvesting and crafting system, check out New World. Both ESO and New World are wonderful games that I've played before and am fully intending to play in the future. For my PvP needs, I think my main focus will be New World. For fun times with my community, I'll probably be playing ESO. For going hardcore with a small group of friends and trying to become the best players in the server, I'll be looking at New World. For casual hangouts with other friends and keeping up my series of MagDK builds, I'll be playing ESO. And as for you, you can choose whichever game you like to. I mean, hell, what do I know even? I'm just one guy with over 7 years of experience playing ESO and like 2 weeks of playing New World Beta. Maybe you should judge the games for yourselves and see what you like. Anyways, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful, whether you needed a recommendation of which game to choose or just wanted to hear a random YouTube pleb talk about why your game is better or worse than another. If you liked this video, I'll very much appreciate it if you'll hit the like button and subscribe for more. I'd love to get back to full-time content creation again in the future, and the only way I could do that is through your support. My other socials will also be in the description if you'd like to check out my Twitch or my community Discord, and do check out my Patreon if you like what I do and would like to support me, like all these people did. Thank you, by the way, patrons, I appreciate that. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching this video, I truly appreciate your support, and now go and play some MMOs and also fuck Nazi.